So, welcome everybody. This is the 5th lecture in my course on Tranquility and Insight. I first of all really want to thank all of you for being so diligent with the homework. I was really impressed seeing all the different contributions and thoughts and reflections on the forum. This is very, very beautiful for me. I learn from all your ideas, and also I get a real feeling of interest and help. I come across a discourse I don't understand, and then all of you are there to help me sort it out. Just a technical matter I wanted to just one more time mention, and I hope you forgive me for that, but it would be good if we can avoid giving links to non-academic information on the website. There's always the possibility of private communication. If you access any of the names or pictures of anybody who has contributed, then you can click on that and you get the email of that particular person. You can send them private information on Taoist yoga or whatever you like to discuss. But since we are doing an academic course, it would really be preferable if on the discussion forum we can concentrate on academic sources of information and anything that is your personal opinion or take on things. And I wanted to also briefly mention something on available translations. I would not recommend relying on the Thanissaro translations. They are not always accurate. It would be much better if you can rely on Bhikkhu Bodhi's translations. I understand that Thanissaro's translations are easily available, just one click on the web. Unfortunately, Bhikkhu Bodhi's translations are copyrighted by Wisdom, but still, if you want to be sure to get a clear idea of what a particular passage is saying, I think you are in better hands if you rely on Bhikkhu Bodhi's translation. These are the translation I would recommend for you to look up and to reference also if you find the system that I and academics use for referencing by giving number and page and volume of the PTS edition is a little complicated. You could simply quote the Wisdom publications, translations, and the pagination, the page so and so in the translation. That would be an easy way of saying what passage you have in mind, and we would make sure that you have a very, very reliable translation. So there were first a few questions in general, and then we come to the homework. This is a rather long thing. I don't know if I can get it all in once. Let us see. It's a little too long. It's by Justin Williams, and he asks a general question on the significance of the immaterial attainments, the immaterial absorptions, he calls them. Some call them. And because this belongs to the general topic of tranquility and insight, I thought of taking this up first. So he says, is right concentration consistently portrayed in the early discourses as the 4 jhanas only? It seems that in various suttas the above 8 states, the 4 jhanas and the immaterial states, are treated as one sequence. I would like to know if there's any evidence for this being a later development. I understand these 8 together are referred to by the commentators as the 8 jhanas, but I find it significant that they are not in the suttas, where they remain distinct by name. The Buddha was supposed to have attained the 2 highest of the 4 immaterial states while studying under his 2 teachers before he was enlightened. That is to say, he gained mastery of these 2 states before he had ever attained the 2nd, 3rd or 4th jhana, and had only one experience of the 1st jhana years before as a child. What is the place of the immaterial states in the earliest layer of the suttas? Could they be a later addition to the system of Buddhist practice, or is it clear that they were part of what the Buddha was teaching? There's again something missing here. I'm sorry for that. I just put in the last, I put in the whole full last sentence so you get that completely. So the last part is, could there be a later addition to the system of Buddhist practice, or is it clear that they were part of what the Buddha was teaching his students to practice from the earliest layer of evidence? So the first question about right concentration, there is an alternative definition that does not stipulate the depth of concentration, the 4 jhanas, but rather speaks of just concentration that is practiced in conjunction with the other path factors. Excuse me. And I have discussed that a little bit in my Satipatthana book, so I would suggest to turn to that for further discussion of the significance of right concentration. My own take is that what makes concentration samma is that it is practiced in conjunction with the other path factors. Whereas even profound concentration, even the 4th absorption, would not be right, or samma, right is the standard translation, if it is practiced outside of the Eightfold Noble Path. Then, as Justin rightly observes, the 8 immaterial states or spheres are not called jhanas. And my understanding is that they are, strictly speaking, are not really different jhanas, because they all correspond to the 4th jhana in the standard system we get in the discourses. So we have 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, this kind of series of gradually deepening states of absorption, and then from the 4th absorption, the basic setup of the mind in terms of the mental qualities and the strength of concentration present is the same, but the object deepens. First, there could have been an object, some kind of maybe like a light we were discussing, or maybe a color, somebody working with a color casino, and this is being refined by letting even the perception of materiality disappear and dissolve into boundless space. And then boundless space is experienced as that which is aware of space, boundless consciousness, etc. So there's a refinement of the object of the practice, but if we look at it from the viewpoint of the central qualities of the concentrated mind, all of this would fall under the 4th jhana. And so this is why in some context we find only the 4th jhana mentioned, the 4 jhanas. It goes only up to the 4th, because in certain contexts, when it is just a question of describing the depth of concentration achieved, it will be sufficient to mention the 4 jhanas, and it will not be necessary to add on top the question of the immaterial attainments. Now there's a strand in scholarship that I believe goes back to Bronkhorst, who argues that the immaterial spheres are a later addition to the early teachings. This is a rather complex argument, and if you really want, maybe some later time we could go into that, but at present I would just like to say that as far as I can see, this is not convincing. The thing is that the immaterial spheres come interwoven in several discourses in such a manner that it is difficult to see how they could be a later addition. One of them is the Anālayo-sutta, Madhyama-āgama 106, which we'll be taking up not this, but probably next Thursday. Another one is the smaller discourse on emptiness, Madhyama-āgama 121. Again, the problem is one of methodology to some extent. I mean, we can assume any kind of thing that the Buddha originally taught, but as far as the evidence is concerned, if we have something fairly consistent in parallel versions as being part of the teaching, it is difficult to take the position, I find, that this is a later addition. And now in some discourses, when we compare the parallel versions, we find that these four immaterial states are mentioned in one place and not mentioned in the other. But this again is something fairly natural in oral transmission, that there's a piece gets lost in one part or in another part. So as far as I can see, it seems to me that these four immaterial spheres are pretty much integral part of what I would like to call early Buddhism. That is the type of Buddhism that we can reconstruct based on the textual sources. And about the Buddha's own progress to awakening, if you look at the passage in Aryapariyesana-sutta, Majjhima Nikāya 26, the way it is described what he achieved under his teachers, it must be the full-fledged attainment of nothingness, or neither perception nor non-perception, because the Buddha is on record for saying that he is not satisfied with it because it only leads to being reappearance in the corresponding realm. So if that is the case, he must have the text must be portraying to us not just an superficial acquaintance with this type of perception, but really a full-fledged attainment of the third and fourth of the immaterial spheres. And according to tradition, again, I see no reason for doubting that it is not possible to fully attain these immaterial spheres without gaining the first, second, third, and fourth absorption. And if we look at the account of what happened before, we find that in some parallel versions, the Bodhisattva, still at that point, is on record for training under other teachers where he would have learned the jhanas. So the way I would put this together, and this is just my take on it, you are perfectly free to find your own way, is that the Bodhisattva would have had to develop the four absorptions. But if he did that, at least in the training he had under Alara Kalam and Udakkarama Buddha, the happiness that one experienced in these absorptions would have been very much underemphasized. It would have been stressed as something that is not conducive to the final goal, that is something that one moves through as quickly as possible in order to come to the real thing, which is the deep equanimity of the fourth absorption, and then to develop the immaterial spheres. So from that kind of perspective, then, by seeing happiness as such as something problematic, as something to be wary of, it would have been a shift of understanding for him when we hear that he reflects, oh look, but when I was young I experienced this first absorption, and that happiness was not at all related to sensuality. Could this be the path to awakening? So my understanding is that he doesn't say the first jhana itself is the path to awakening, but much rather the path to awakening is being willing to cultivate wholesome types of joy, not being afraid of them for the fact that they are joy in themselves. And thus out of this crucial distinction between what is wholesome and what is unwholesome, what we also find adumbrated in Dvedavitaka-sutta, Majjhima Nikāya 19. So the way I interpret the account of how the Buddha proceeded to awakening, I would see this distinction between what is wholesome or skillful, kusala, and what is unwholesome or unskillful, akusala, as the crucial thing that informs his further progress. So my personal take to the last, to round this up, is that as far as I can see, the immaterial spheres are part of the early discourses. They are clearly recognized as something that is not Buddhist in itself, but something that comes from the preceding tradition, which, as far as we're able to tell, applies to the jhanas also. And I do not find it convincing, the arguments made that they are a later addition to the two early Buddhist teachings. Yeah, that was on the immaterial spheres. Then there was a question on the mind by Kim Allen. Some views of the mind claim that mind is the maker of all experience. Ultimately, there is no external. So I deleted some part of it. The notion of the mind being the ultimate source of all experience. Yeah, so this is, as far as I'm able to tell, not the position taken in early Buddhism. In early Buddhism, the mind. Let's be very, very, very simple and put it in my own case. So, for me to have any experience of you, as you are listed here as practitioners, some of you I meet, seeing you on your comments on the forum, etc., it is only possible through my mind. Without mind, without having consciousness, I would not be able to have any experience of you. So in as far as my subjective experience is concerned, my mind is the ground of my experience of you. But this has no direct effect on you, on your existence. If I were to die next moment and my consciousness were to move somewhere else, it would not change the fact that you exist independent of my mind. Yeah? You go your own way. But for me, the only way to experience you is through my mind. So this is actually the basic principle of dependent arising, paticca-samuppada. And so early Buddhism neither takes the position that everything is kind of out there all by itself, because it says whatever is out there, it's only through my mind that I can experience it. But at the same time, it doesn't make things outside dependent on my mind for the fact that they exist. So mind is the maker, is not the maker of all experience, is the maker of my experience. And the mind is not the ultimate source of all experience, but of my experience. Then there were two comments on vitakka vichara, the two factors of the first absorption, and that was Wei-Yin Cho. She just made this very nice remark in relation to the fact that these two are verbal formations in Majjhima Nikaya 44, the Chula Vedalla Sutta, and she says that it looks as though vitakka vichara are pre-verbal. I thought that was a very nice way of putting it. And then there was a question by Martha Lee Turner. She's quoting the interpretation given by others. And this interpretation goes, the expression vitakka vichara was originally, that is in the suttas, a paired expression conveying a single meaning. Some few suttas do make a distinction, and from that distinction describe jhana 1.5, vichara no vitakka. But this shows those suttas to be late and at the beginning of abhidhammic thought. And she already noticed that bit is circular unless we can find grounds for the early use as a handy at this. Yeah, so I also feel like Martha that this interpretation is somewhat circular, and offhand I am not aware for clear evidence that vitakka and vichara were originally just giving a single meaning. And it is certainly true that the analysis of the absorptions with the help of these vitakka and vichara aspect into three levels of absorption is relatively seldom. However, we do have it, and we have just seen it's there in Upakilesa-sutta and in the Chinese parallel. And it seems to me also that in the context of this exposition, it is not out of place. Therefore, I personally, again, I see no firm ground for saying that this must be late. And this is something that, we might want to be conscious of, that sometimes this category late, also somebody on the blog just disqualified this discourse on the gods as something late. It is possible that these things are late. I'm not disputing that, but for us to take the position of saying this is late we will need to have some firm grounds to stand on. And of course the firmest, the strongest ground we can find is if we do comparative studies and we find, look, it's in one version but not in the other. And then out of contextual evaluation we can also say, look, the place where it is in that one version, it doesn't fit, so this really looks like a later edition. Then we are really on strong grounds. But if things are found in both versions, or even more than one versions, it becomes a little more difficult. We would have to really construct a very thorough argument on showing that it is really inconsistent and doesn't fit the early discourses. My personal take is that it is much more beneficial for our understanding to take what is there in all versions pretty much as, okay, this is as far as we can go back, and nobody knows if this was what the Buddha originally taught, but we're coming fairly close, and let me see how I can make sense out of that. Actually, what you all have been teaching me with this discourse on gods, that by simply reflecting on it and looking at it, one can find aspects that make sense, and that seems to me to be a better approach. And in my personal view, the analysis of the absorption into vitakka and vichara, it seems to me as meaningful as the other more usual found into four absorptions. And offhand, I don't find any of them to be more abhidharmic necessarily. So yeah, I don't see strong evidence for dismissing the vitakka vichara presentation as late. Cho Deoko, I hope I have gotten your name correctly. Vitakka vichara are pre-verbal. In my opinion, I feel vitakka vichara are in the midst of verbalization. What do you think, Bhante? Yes, they are both there. Vitakka and vichara is there at a stage before I start to really formulate things, and then it has to continue with me as I keep thinking. But I just thought that was because in my presentation I had only been emphasizing the aspect that is kind of really, as you say, in the midst of verbalization. I thought that was a nice round off, but yeah, you're very sharp. You spotted right away. Yeah, let's put it at both. So it can have this pre-verbal function, and this is actually, I think, also what it has in the context of absorption. This is why I liked Wei and Cho's contribution, because it makes us aware that something that, even though in normal day life we will experience it as something conceptual, it has as a basic dynamic of the mind, it also can have this pre-verbal function, this function that does not rely on the explicit use of concepts, and thus can be used in a state of mind that, as far as I can tell, is not really involved in conceptual thought, but in stillness of the mind. Yeah, then there was a question by Hedwig Kren. Cho Deoko says, it is not my word, I just learned it from Bhante Vimalarangsi. I just agreed on it and wanted to share it. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. So Hedwig, I think maybe I don't paste in what she said, but just she wanted me to explain again on the issue of joy as an object of concentration instead of the light nimitta. And no, but yeah. Yeah, I think it's better to give at least part of the question. So that she said that I said that for a teacher it's more difficult to guide a student when he's using joy as the concentration object instead of the light nimitta, and that she would like to understand why, and also she would like to know if the Buddha gave a discourse about joy regarding this topic and how to exactly deal with it while meditating. Yeah, so my understanding of the standard description of the four absorptions is precisely on this the standard description of the four absorption is highlighting the gradual refinement of joy and happiness or rapture, and that this is basically the main method, main approach taken for the cultivation of absorption in early Buddhism. And the light nimitta, as I said, we get it very rarely, and even what we find in Gayāsīsa-sutta is not really exactly one-to-one Visuddhimagga description, but it is a precedent. It is something that seems to be pointing in the same direction, but there are also clearly some differences. So if the use of the light nimitta would have been as prominent in early Buddhism as it is nowadays, we would expect considerably more discussion and descriptions related to it, which we don't. So my personal understanding here is that in the early times the emphasis was on the cultivation of happiness, the happiness that is aloof from sensuality, and especially as in the context of the gradual path, the happiness of contentment, sense restraint, and then leading to the happiness of seclusion in the first absorption, and so on. As a meditation teacher, it is a little bit more difficult to know when somebody says, I'm so blissed out. It's a little bit more difficult to gauge that experience, as if somebody says, I'm seeing a light and it looks like this and like that. The thing is simply that the light has certain features as brilliance, stability, murkiness, shakiness, etc., that however the meditator may be carried away by her or his experience, as a teacher it's easy to spot what they are talking about. But when somebody is usually very happy and excited about having a certain experience, the way they describe the bliss and happiness that they experienced, it is much more difficult as a teacher to know which level of happiness they are at. So it's simply that. But for somebody who does not work with a teacher and works on his or her own, this might not be such a problem. Yeah, and I mean, she also asked about teachers. I can't really give recommendations for teachers there. I think what we can do always is to look at what the discourses teach us, and then have that as a background when approaching any kind of teaching situation. So that is my preliminary discussion. If there are any questions or comments, otherwise we go into the discourse on gods. So I found very helpful by Manfred Wiesberger. He pointed out that in the first discourse in the Majjhima Nikaya, in the Mula-Pariyaya-sutta, we have the uninstructed worldling, the Putujjana, who is able to, he conceives of gods as gods, Manyati, and the Tathagata directly knows gods as gods. So there is in both cases, there is the same object, these devas, but there is a different way of relating to them, let's say epistemologically, the way how one deals with them, instead of having all kind of ideas. And particularly the Mula Pariyaya is particularly strong on this sense of identification, and to see oneself in a particular relationship to them that has an undercurrent of craving or clinging. And whereas the Tathagata is directly knows. And I thought this already points in a very important direction, that this discourse on gods, with all this series of 8 different aspects, is basically, this is my interpretation based on Manfred, is basically leading from a more ordinary way of knowing these devas to something quite penetrative, to parinya, to directly knowing. Then there was a comment by Justin Williams, and he points out that there's a kind of a little bit like a jerk or a lack of transition, lack of smooth transition between the first part of the discourse and what comes after. He says that after the light and forms are mentioned, but then suddenly he mentions these gods. This seems too sudden. It would make sense to me only if the topic had already been introduced. I should be expecting that he would be meeting gods. And moreover, not just gods, but specifically these gods. What gods? At least in English this doesn't make sense. These would mean they have already been introduced, and so we know specifically that those he's talking about. Is it the same in Pāli? And I say, yes, it is. In the Pāli we suddenly get this tahi devatahi, which Bhikkhu Bodhi translates as those deities. So it's clear that even before only light and forms were mentioned, somehow it seems, from the flow of the discourse, it seems self-evident that this refers to these devas. And so Justin gives us four different explanations, four possible explanations. One is that there is something missing in between. That is, there is a passage, a transition passage between the description of light and forms and the first reference to these devas, and that this has been lost, which could easily have happened. Or number two, a story of light and forms has been added to a story of meeting gods. That is, this could have been first two different pieces, one on light and forms and one on devas, and then during the course of transmission at some point they were joined together. Number three, the story was complete but has been expanded. From example, originally starting, I had this thought, if only I could give rise to bright light, and because of that bright light see forms and meet those gods, exchange greeting with them, etc. But they added a previous section to make it more step by step, excluding the God sections and giving us our sections 1. So there's again that there's some the development of the structure of the discourse in order to make it a gradual lead up, if I understand him correctly, has led to the form it is now. And number 4, which I thought is particularly interesting, there's something in the first section which already tells the audience to expect the subject to be meeting with gods. In that case, is there some way that seeing bright light and forms naturally implies meeting gods? So the audience the sutta was composed for. And that is interesting because that is what I also thought. I think it need not be the only explanation. This is why I purposely gave all the 4 explanations that Justin has been devising for us. But on reading the discourse, and this is the nice thing in the Madhyama-āgama, it comes right after the Upakilesa-sutta, where in the Upakilesa-sutta we would really not be thinking this is about seeing gods. There is no real pointer in that discourse in that direction as far as I can see. And here in this Madhyama-āgama, right away afterwards, in this discourse on gods, this seeing of light and forms seems to almost implicitly mean that there has to be some connection with the devas. I can't say that this must be, but this is just one very interesting interpretation for looking at, and also for looking back at the Upakilesa-sutta, what it signifies. So thank you to Justin. And there's Robert Grosh. So he says the sutta does not make any sense in terms of a meditation instruction. Usually when at a stage of bright light and forms, one wants to let the mind unify itself by letting go and not split it up by analyzing beings in the light or communicating to such beings. The conflict I see with the usual way the teaching is laid out becomes even stronger because it is not claimed that devas could be potentially helpful on the path to awakening. It goes much further, claiming, once I had rightly come to know these 8 courses, I then knew that I had awakened to the supremely right and true path. Yeah, I thought that was just a very nice comment to show, and it resonates with what I think also. Like I would also think, like if one gets bright light and forms. One just wants to concentrate and not go around and look at what is it, converse with devas and other names and their lifespan, etc. The issue that the Buddha in this discourse claims to have awakened to the supremely right and true path, that there's a standard formulation in a number of discourses that show different facets of the Buddha's awakening, that he knew the gratification, danger and escape in relation to this and that and that and that. And so I think each of these is not meant to be saying that this is the only thing that he realized. What he would have realized is the attainment, the realization of nirvana. And even the Four Noble Truths is just one way of communicating that experience based on ancient Indian medical diagnostic scheme, expressing this in a particular form so that people can understand. But this one realization can be expressed in different forms. And so one of these forms could also be to really know what these devas are about. But still, the way the discourse presents it, I agree with Robert, is unusual. Now, Bhikkhu Dhammadasa, he says, both suttas we have looked at in lecture 4 regarding light and devas are for me referring to the second of the three Devijja that the Buddha is said to have developed in his awakening, which may also be called the divine eye or Dibbacakku. I thought that was a very helpful suggestion, because it kind of gives us a way of relating this description to one of the three knowledges that traditionally are held to be the essential aspects of what happened in the night of the awakening. And there too, to see beings passing away and reappearing according to their former deeds is a little bit similar, not exactly the same, but a little bit similar to really understanding different aspects of these devas. So I just found that really helpful. Then there was Ottmar Domingo. So many people been contributing this time. It's really lovely. He says, the Indian culture as transmitted in the Nikayas makes no clear differences between humans, animals and supernaturals, like most other cults, where the borders between humans and supernaturals can't be broken. And he speaks of a porosity between the realm of humans and the realms of supernaturals. I like that porosity. In this discourse, it seems not clear if the Blessed One talks about an inner or an outer reality. I thought that was also a good point, that this very clear distinction that in our Western culture we are accustomed to make between inner and outer is not so clear-cut in the ancient Indian context. And this idea of a porosity, I found that just very helpful. I still have much more, and there would be much more on the forum to quote. There's so many beautiful things. I can only give you an extract of some of these. This is Patrick Conway. So he asks, why in some passages would gods be considered marginal to the quest, while in other passages, such as Anguttara Nikaya 864, would knowledge of them be so central? It leads me to suggest that the knowledge and understanding to which the Buddha refers here is about a more complete understanding of karma and dependent origination, applied to what would have been an unquestioned dimension of existence in the Buddha's time and culture. The gods and devas are just another dimension of world systems that the Buddha's understanding of karma, dependent origination, etc. would have to penetrate for his awakening to have been complete. This gives us a very good edge, I think, on this discourse, in the sense of that this type of knowledge that we have here in these 8 steps, 8 facets in the Madhyama-āgama, which in our thinking doesn't really strike us as particularly relevant, but it still can be seen as a way of exploring karma and dependent origination. and karma is in fact explicitly mentioned a little bit in the discourse, and that when we look at it from that perspective and see these gods as something that was very essential in the ancient culture, we can also see why this would find its place. This is Ray Lee. He says, step by step I see the discourse as a record of the Buddha's meditative attainment. The light in step 1 is similar to the pre-jhanic nimitta. Then it moves into the cyclic dependent origination, beginning with nama-rupa, that is name and form, nutriment and feeling, birth and death. Step 6 is when the Buddha explored the need to understand karma. I'm a bit stumped on step 7 and 8 at the moment, but only when the Buddha was able to penetrate all 8 steps, of which dependent origination is the core, was he able to claim full liberation. So here Ray has kind of given us a real, kind of very direct relationship to most of these 8 steps from this kind of doctrinal perspective. Found that also very useful. Then a comment by Frank K. It's about this whole issue of whether devas should be interpreted only as an expression of something internal. And he says, I don't see how the suttas can be interpreted in any way other than the Buddha treated devas as actual beings in actual realms of existence. I would very much agree with that. He continues, what some skeptics of Deva and rebirth say is that the Buddha simply indulged these supposedly wrong views of Devas and rebirth because his followers were not mature enough yet, similar to how parents would allow their kids to believe in Santa Claus and the boogeyman to serve some short-term purposes. That line of reasoning makes no sense at all. The Buddha was not shy about pointing out wrong views, even when talking face-to-face with famous contemporary teachers of his time. In so many ways, the Buddha described the drawbacks and dangers, from the most subtle to coarsest forms of craving and attachment. Wouldn't it be unbelievably inconsistent if he somehow allowed devas and rebirths to be the exception? Yeah, I would not have expressed it as strongly as Frank, but I find myself pretty much in agreement with him that, again, it can be a very skillful means for oneself or when teaching Buddhism in a Western context to promote this type of psychologizing interpretation. But here, as we are doing a university course in which we are trying to apply the method, the critical historical method, to try to understand what the texts are actually about, I think there's no way escaping the fact that as far as these texts allow us to judge, devas and also supernatural events are an integral part of the world of early Buddhism. This is Jayanta Gunavardhana. He offers this just as a speculation. This is a discourse originally given to an audience of devas who are enjoying the good life in essential happy plane. In addition to the good life, they are also blessed with long life, which could make them convinced that they were existing in an eternal paradise, sasadditi. The danger inherent to a continuous cycle of samsara would be furthest from their minds. The Buddha with his Buddha power could see that in spite of the distractions, there were individuals among the devas that had little dust in their eyes and had the potential and capacity to understand the Dhamma. So he basically says that this discourse was originally directly addressed to these devas, which I thought was a very interesting idea. And then he makes this suggestion: the sutta is either A, the Buddha repeating to the monks the discourse made to the devas, or B, the word devas has with time been replaced with the word monks. That is, in the oral transmission, even though it was originally addressing the devas, because many discourses are spoken to monks, then the devas could become replaced by bhikkhus. That was, I think, a very interesting edge he has taken on this discourse. This is Lothar Birke. He says the realization of the conditioned and impermanent nature of the form of existence of these gods was at the time absolutely unheard of. I can understand that a Buddhist today would not see much point in dwelling with his thoughts excessively on those heavenly forms of existence. But as there was no Buddhism at the time prior to the Buddha's awakening, where was he to look instead? He had to investigate all the realms accessible to his senses and supernatural perception and see the anicca, dukkha and anatta of all of them in order to gain the strength of conviction that there must be some state beyond all of that, which was unknown to all and everyone in the world at that time. The strength of conviction which then caused him to sit down under the Bodhi tree and make his famous pledge not to leave his seat without having realized that beyond. Yeah, that was also, to me, I found it very, very helpful to kind of think that actually what this discourse is talking about is the pre-awakening explorations of the Buddha. And it is precisely the point that what we usually get in other discourses is like the condensed version of the path, in the sense of what was and what is really necessary, morality, concentration, wisdom, but similar to the ascetic practices, which according to the traditional account the Buddha found not helpful and then disregarded. Similar, this discourse may also fall under these things that are not really necessary for each and everyone, but were still necessary for the Buddha at that time to come to that final decision under the Bodhi tree to not get up until he's gone beyond even that. Then there's Bhikkhu Arya Dhammika. Very beautiful contribution. He gives 3 explanations. I am taking the first and the third only, and here is only the first. Yeah, the forum this time was so rich for me. So he says, as we can deduct from the Susima-sutta in the Samyutta Nikaya, it might have been the common understanding among people and ascetics at the time of the Buddha that an awakened being certainly must be in possession of a wide range of psychic powers, including recollection of past lives and communication with devas. One could even speculate that the Buddha himself, prior to his awakening, might have held such a view, which resonates stronger in the Chinese than the Pāli version of the Gayāsīsa-sutta. Therefore, after having met Susima, or after having had a conversation of a similar kind at another time, the Buddha may have felt a need to reveal to some monks that his own enlightenment was not lacking any type of knowledge and vision, not even the knowledge and vision with regards to devas. In such a context, the audience would have understood perfectly well that the purpose of this discourse was not to outline the details of the practice leading to full awakening, but simply to show that the Buddha's own awakening does not fall short of purified knowledge and vision with regards to devas. In fact, the message, do we have that here also? Yes. Difficult to paste it all in, is so much. Let me see. Okay. Regards to devas, yes. In fact, the message would stick even better to the mind of the audience if he were to use a familiar way of phrasing his statement, and he refers to Dhammacakkappavattana-sutta. Using the same style of presentation would have been a very good way of making a strong and firm statement, and furthermore one that is really easy to remember, which is of importance especially in a tradition where texts are transmitted orally. Yeah, there I wanted to just I have here again the final statement in the Chinese, and it is a little bit less close to the statement recorded in the what according to tradition is the first discourse, the Dhammacakkappavattana-sutta. And I've underlined 2 parts here. So according to this statement, when the Buddha had realized these 8 aspects, he had transcended this world with its gods. I thought that really brings out something that several of you have already mentioned, And then we have this, I became separated from all distortions. Both are not the standard way of describing the Buddha's attainment of full awakening, even in the Madhyama-āgama. So in line with what Bhikkhu Arya Dhammika has suggested, it is even possible that originally the statement that was linking these 8 forms of knowledge of the devas to the Buddha's awakening was phrased in a more specific manner, in terms of like transcending the gods and becoming separated from all distortions, which one could interpret as meaning all kind of distorted ideas about what these gods are and what their significance is. And such a statement, it would be very natural in the course of all transmission, because it mentions awakening at the end, birth is ended, holy life has been established, etc., that it becomes replaced with the standard description of the Buddha's awakening. This is just a hypothesis, but it would explain, it would contextualize that discourse better, and it would explain why in the Pali version we get a statement that is very close to the formulation in the Dhammacakkappavattana-sutta. And he has another explanation, a third. Both the Pali as well as the Chinese version have as their 8th practice knowledge and vision, experiential understanding that oneself previously had taken birth among those gods. This can indeed be a very powerful type of reflection, namely understanding that one has been reborn now here, then there, even up among the gods. Realizing this and comparing it with one's present states, life as a human being, can give rise to an understanding of impermanence. Yeah, I that very much resonates with me, and we also have it in the Mahasi Anālayo-sutta, Majjhima Nikaya number 12, where the Buddha is on record for accounting that he has pretty much been to all the places. It's like he's like in samsara. He's been everywhere and seen it all. And this 8 point that I also think that this has a particular significance. It rounds up the whole exploration of, okay, you experience light and form, and then you come to know that there are other beings, and you even recognize them and see how they live, understand what leads to their rebirth, even able to have separate them out as individuals. But then this recognition, I have been one of these too before. This to me has a strong pointer towards insight, in the way Venerable Arya Dhammika has been putting it. Yeah, this is from Martha Lee Turner. I think I have to cut it up. She says, in the culture into which this sutta was originally spoken, the idea of gods and devas may have been not only accepted but had reverential resonances and also causal significance. And people lacked cultural tools to be able to dismiss their relevance to experience spiritual phenomena. I'm guessing that people in the Buddhist culture were at some risk of interpreting meditative states or transcendent experience as signs of the presence or favor of devas or similar beings, and that this could have been for them an obstacle to seeing with full clarity. Thus it may have been practically necessary to help people rework their ideas of supernatural beings. Necessary, that is, to help their practice move forward without impediment. I'm seeing the Madhyama-āgama 73 and Anguttara Nikaya 864 as urging a strategic reworking of these views. Just one small part still. From the perspective of just teaching a path to freedom, it might be enough to help them rework their beliefs about devas just enough that those beliefs stop hindering their meditative progress. Yeah, I found this also a very, very useful perspective on the discourse. And then Martha, in another contribution on the forum, has asked whether I know of any evidence that supports her interpretation of the role of gods in early Buddhism. So she says, so now I'm curious about whether these ideas that mind states encountered in meditation might be caused by the gift or grace of sign of the presence of or relationship with supernatural beings had any currency in the world into which the Buddha brought his message. Yeah, so I thought at this point I say a little bit on the role of gods in early Buddhism. So as Frank rightly said, that it is clear that gods are seen as something that actually exists. At the same time, however, there is a currency of treating them in a way that is has a lot of humor to it. So there's one in the Brahmajala-sutta where there's this, it's a persiflage of the idea of a creator god. Basically, the story goes that Brahma is the cosmological realm where Brahma lives has been destroyed due to the cyclic destruction of the world. And when this appears again, it's empty. There's nobody in there. And some being in a higher realm, because of its loss of merit, it gets reborn in this Brahma world and finds himself all alone there. And then thinks, poof, wouldn't it be nice if somebody came here? And soon later, a few other beings whose merit also got exhausted are also reborn in the same place. And then the first being thinks, oh, I am the creator. You see, I thought may beings come here, and here they are. And then other beings that are reborn also think, wow, he must have been created us. So this tale is using Brahma to poke fun at the idea of a creator god. Then another passage, we get a monk and he wants to know where the four elements is, earth, water, fire and wind, symbolic of material existence. And so he goes through all these different heavenly realms and asks everybody, like, do you know where these four elements stop completely? And nobody knows, and they always send him up to somebody higher. And eventually he comes up to great Brahma, Mahabrahma. And he asked, and Mahabrahma says, I am the great Brahma. And the monk says, I didn't really ask whether you are the great Brahma. I asked, do you know where the four elements is? I am the great Brahma. So it continues a little bit like this. And then Brahma takes the monk aside and says, look, all these other gods here, they think I know everything, but I also don't know, so please don't ask me in public. And better go down and ask the Buddha. Again, we see a very humorous, ironic way of introducing Mahabrahma and basically making the point that the Buddha is even superior to the creator god of ancient India. And we get another such instance in the Brahmanimantanika-sutta of the Majjhima Nikaya, where the Buddha and Brahma, they are kind of doing a hide-and-seek competition that each tries to disappear from the vision of the other, and Brahma is not able to do that, but the Buddha is able, so the Buddha wins over Brahma in a celestial hide-and-seek. And then there's still another passage in the Samyutta Nikaya where there is another Brahma who believes that nobody is superior to him and nobody can come to his realm. And then the Buddha and all his monks, they come and they seat themselves higher than him. So we find this whole strand of accepting Brahma in the way he was described in ancient Indian context, but then this is a strategy that in scholarly circles is called inclusivism. Inclusivism from the idea of including. These gods are included, but then they are reworked in such a way that they're almost made to stand on their head, and that they are actually convey a Buddhist message. And we get the same one with Sakka. Sakka is the Buddhist name for the ancient Indian warrior god Indra. And this is it's really a warrior god, somebody who fights, and that's quite a wild person. And in Buddhism, he becomes transformed into a Buddhist disciple who is very peace-loving. And in the discourse I'm giving you here in the Sakkapanya-sutta, he is even timid of approaching the Buddha. And we are told that on a previous occasion he came to visit the Buddha and he was not allowed in because the Buddha was meditating and couldn't be disturbed. And at the end of the discourse, then we are told that when Sakka had visited other spiritual teachers of his time, they got really excited and they became his disciples. And so again we get this contrast, like the king of gods goes there and other teachers, they get really excited and become his disciples. And here the first time he's not even allowed to come forward because he's being told, look, the Buddha is meditating, you can't come in. And then when we get, but then the main body of the discourse is a series of question and answer on quite a profound matter. And we are told that Sakka gets stream entry. And another discourse we get Sakka, and he gets a short teaching by the Buddha, but instead of putting that into practice, he goes back to amuse himself in his heavenly realm, and then a disciple of the Buddha, Mahamoggallana, goes up there and performs a supernormal feat to chastise him. And then there's Mara. I'm just quickly going through the main personalities we meet in the Buddhist celestial world. And Mara is a Buddhist god. We do not really know of antecedents in ancient India. And there's a recurrent interpretation of Mara as signifying one's own defilements, one's own uncertainties, one's own insecurities. And while this interpretation works for some passages, for a number of passages that does not work. And I'm just wanting to give you those few examples. Here, the discourse in the Samyutta Nikaya, we get the story that Mara is transforming himself into an ox, and then he walks close to the begging bowls of the monks to disturb them while they are listening to a talk given by the Buddha. It's a little difficult to see how this could be interpreted as a reflection of inner defilements. And another discourse which is all on Mara, Tajaniya-sutta in the Madhyama Nikaya, we get the story of a former Buddha in the past who goes begging, and his chief monk disciple follows him, an Arahant monk, and then Mara comes from behind and hits that monk on the head so that he starts bleeding. Again, what inner defilements could that be reflecting? And in the same discourse earlier, we get that the present Mara of the present time, he tries to disturb Mahamoggallana by getting into his bowels. So these passages do not fit an interpretation of Mara as representing only one's inner defilements. And then some scholars have even drawn the conclusion, based on this interpretation, that the Buddha was not free from all defilements because he still gets visits by Mara, and because Mara must be, according to these scholars, representing inner defilements, this must mean Buddha still has inner defilements. And I think this is a misunderstanding, a very current among several scholars, of the role of Mara. And in a paper that at present is about to be published, I'm arguing for a different interpretation, in that Maras can also simply signify challenges made by outsiders towards Buddhists and the way of dealing with them. So that was my short run through the main gods, and then more specifically to what Martha had said about this relationship between light and this inner experience and gods. I have often not found that much, but there is one passage in the Mahagovinda-sutta where we clearly get a reflection. This is a story of a former time where somebody has the wish for communion with Brahma. So this wishing to be one with Brahma, and then out of that wish, this person then practices the Brahma Viharas. And eventually in this discourse, Brahma then indeed reveals himself to this person. And perhaps closer to our story of a vision of lights and forms, the Janavasabha-sutta, it's just a short passage in this discourse. We are in the heaven of the 33. This is the heaven where Sakka, Indra, is the king. And we get this description that the gods of the 33, they know that Brahma, he is a higher god in the cosmology, will appear among them if a great light shines forth, or bhasa. And then we are also told that for Brahma to make himself visible to these gods, he has to assume a grosser form. And what he does then, he multiplies himself and sits in front of each, so that each of the 33 is in bliss, thinking that, oh, Brahma is seating right with me. This is just a personal interpretation, but I see some similarity in this description and the meditative experience of light that leads to the absorption corresponding to the Brahma realm. So again, with this what Ottmar Domingo said, this porosity between inner and outer, I see that these passages could be pointing in that direction. However, the question of gift or grace from gods does not seem to be a central topic in early Buddhist discourse, as far as I'm able to tell. So, back to the forum. Kim Allen. She says, I would suggest that the series of investigations about the gods might be analogized to understanding the ways that the mind can achieve, abide in, become attached to, and let go of the refined states of tranquility that come from deepening practice. By thoroughly understanding these things, the mind achieves mastery of the states themselves, as well as seeking its own patterns of desire and clinging. Such a comprehensive investigation is needed to shake off the higher fetters that include attachment to form and formless states, paving the way for full awakening. Yeah, again, I found this very useful with this basic idea of the porosity between inner and outer, and seeing this outer investigation as reflecting an inner investigation, and particularly the point that for progress towards full awakening there are these fetters to be overcome, which have also this desire, lust or attachment to form and formlessness, which refers to the absorption and the immaterial attainments. So this is a rather long one. Let me see if I get it all in, by Linda Grace. This is Linda Grace. Using the experience obtained through deep concentration as a way of developing insight, in a way not all that different than contemplating any experience in terms of conditionality. The problem isn't the fact of devas per se, but rather the view, that is the ignorant belief, that they are autonomous, permanent, etc., or that the heavenly realms represent the highest happiness. So in describing how he learns more about these devas, with insight into areas such as the experience of pleasure and pain, what they subsist on, their nutriment, why they were born there, the length of lifespan, it does not seem different than the teachings throughout the suttas, e.g. looking at the nutriment for this or that quality, existence, the experience of pleasure and pain, arising and ceasing, the result of actions, and how we are heirs of our karma, and fare according to our karma. The framework just happens to be in terms of those devas. Yeah, the second part didn't get in, so I paste that again. And to follow our course theme, this could point to the development of both tranquility and insight, or wisdom based on samadhi. One way this could be experienced and illustrated. Thought that was nice to correlate that. The last thing he wonders about is whether he had previously lived together with those deities, but again not incompatible as a precursor to seeing into his own past lives at the time of his awakening. Perhaps the inclusion of this last question as to whether he had previously taken birth among those devas was his own verification, that although, or even if he had, despite that, he too was still subject to birth and death, not awakened, not free of suffering, similar to the realization he had that the immaterial states he reached under his former teachers did not in themselves lead to the final goal. Yeah, I found this also very helpful, particularly this parallelism between the immaterial spheres and this understanding of the devas. I have one more. I realize I'm a little bit running out of time, but I hope you are patient with me. This is Shaila Catherine As I understand it, Discourse Anguttara Nikaya 864 offers valuable hints about the role of psychic powers on a liberating path. I believe remarkable mental abilities are a natural outcome of deep jhana practice. Such abilities can be systematically developed to enhance both the strength of samadhi and the clarity of wisdom. The concentrated mind sees things clearly. Although usually a meditator will direct attention to discern his or her own body, mind and causal relations, a concentrated mind may also be directed towards perceiving mind and matter as they appear anywhere and at any time, past, present, future, related to oneself or another being existing nearby, at a distance, or in another realm. It seems quite appropriate to me that an advanced meditator would look toward the Deva realms. Mastery of jhana will have already tranquilized the common cause forms of sensual desire that occur in the human life. The dukkha in hell realms, animal realms, or human existence is so obvious that relatively little contemplation is needed to inspire dispassion, but it would still be possible for an advanced meditator to be seduced by the potential for heavenly bliss or the desire to reap the rewards of wholesome deeds and virtues. Yeah, wonderful. So thank you again to all of you. That was really a very rich harvest for me. And so that you have something more to discuss until next time, so move on to the next discourse. I hope it was okay that I went in such detail on the different contributions, but you see the lectures being recorded and later on people have no access to the forum, and it was just such a rich discussion, and I only was able to pick up a few parts here and there. Beautiful. So, leaving aside the gods and coming to the next discourse, the discourse on 8 thoughts. I'm reading from the discourse. At that time, the Venerable Anuruddha was seated in meditation in a quiet place reflecting. He had these 7 thoughts. Excuse me. The path is attained through having no desires, not through having desires. And then the same statement for through contentment, not through dissatisfaction. Through seclusion, not through rejoicing in company, dwelling in company, being together with company. Through effort, not through indolence. Through right mindfulness, not through wrong mindfulness. Through a concentrated mind, not through a distracted mind. Through wisdom, not through delusion. Yeah, if we compare it with the Pāli version, in the Madhyama-āgama version we are told that it is about having no desires, and the Anguttara Nikaya says few desires, apicca. Then quality number 5 in the Madhyama-āgama version is right mindfulness, and in the Anguttara we are just told about establishing mindfulness. So we have 2 minor differences which, as far as I can see, do not substantially affect the meaning of the teaching. So the discourse continues. Then through the supernormal knowledge of other minds, the Blessed One came to know the thoughts, reflections and activities in the mind of the Venerable Anuruddha. Having come to know this, the Blessed One entered a certain concentrated state. Through this concentrated state, just as a strong man might bend and stretch out his arm, the Blessed One disappeared from the deer park in the Besakala forest on Sungsumara mountain in the Bhaga country, and appeared before the Venerable Anuruddha in the Sampang forest in the Cheti country. So these places are at quite a distance. Then the Buddha expresses his praise, and then he adds an 8th thought. The path is attained through absence of proliferation, delighting in absence of proliferation, and practicing absence of proliferation. Not through proliferation, not through delighting in proliferation, not through practicing proliferation. The word proliferation in the Pāli version, the word is papancha. There's a very nice book on this. I hope you can see this. Concept and Reality in Early Buddhist Thought by Venerable Nyanananda. Venerable Katakurunda Jnanananda is one of our very remarkable monks from Sri Lanka. He was a university lecturer, and he wanted to do this as his, I believe, his MA thesis, if I'm correct. And the head of the department, which is where I did also my PhD many years later, at that time thought that just this word papancha, there's so little to say about it, you can't really do a thesis. But so he didn't do it as a MA thesis, but he just still wrote it. And soon after also he went forth and became a monk. And at the instigation of Venerable Nyanaponika Thera, the founder of the Buddhist Publication Society, it was then published. And it's really a very detailed study. It would certainly have merited to be an MA thesis. So any of you interested in the intricacies of this papancha, of this proliferation, it would highly recommend to use this book. It's a little densely written. He has his own style, and he uses a lot of Pāli terms, but still it's pretty much considered the classic on the term papancha now in scholarly literature. So and now we continue with the discourse, and here we get a lead over to our topic of samatha. The Buddha says, according to this discourse, Anuruddha, if you become accomplished in these 8 thoughts of a great man, you will certainly be able to attain the 4 absorptions, separated from desire, separate from even unwholesome states, up to having attained the 4th absorption. This is a standard thing in the Madhyama-āgama, that instead of giving the full formula, they just abbreviate because it's so well known. So we get these 8 qualities that are said to be conducive to the attainment of absorption. Fewness of desire or no desire, contentment, seclusion, effort, mindfulness, obviously concentration, but also wisdom, and no proliferation. I'm not going to give you special homework. Last time homework was really just to help me understand the discourse, but it would be lovely if some of you feel of expressing ideas about these 8 qualities and their relation to absorption on the forum. Anuruddha, if you become accomplished in the 8 thoughts of a great man and also attain the 4 higher states of mind, happy abidings in the present, attaining them with ease and without difficulty, then you will be like a king or royal minister who has a fine chest full of various types of clothes. Whatever he desires to wear in the morning, he takes and puts on. Whatever clothes he desires to wear at noon or in the afternoon, he takes and puts on, freely according to his wish. Anuruddha, you will be like that. The rag robes you get will be the best of garments, for your mind will be without desires, as you practice this, established in the practice of tranquility. You will be like a king or royal minister who has a good chef, preparing various types of pure, refined, and delectable dishes and meals. Anuruddha, you will be like that. The alms food that you constantly beg will be the best of meals, for your mind will be without desires, as you practice this, established in the practice of tranquility. Every time it's the whole part on the 8 thoughts and the 4 jhanas comes first, and then you will be like a king or royal minister who has a fine house or a storied palace. Anuruddha, you will be like that. The tree beneath which you stay will be the best of houses, for your mind will be without desires, as you practice this, established in the practice of tranquility. And again, the 8 thoughts and the 4 absorptions, you will be like a king or a royal minister who has fine couches and seats, upholstered with woolen textiles, draped with brocades and fine silk fabric, with lined and quilted coverlets, and with cushions made of antelope hide at both ends. Anuruddha, you will be like that. A seat of grass or a seat of leaves will be the best of seats, for your mind will be without desires, as you practice this, established in the practice of tranquility. If you wander like this in the eastern direction, you will certainly be at ease, free of affliction by the multitude of dukkhas. If you wander in the southern direction, the western, the northern direction, you will certainly be at ease, free of affliction by the multitude of dukkhas. Yeah, there's a difference here in the number 5. In the Anguttara Nikaya, the topic brought in is medicine, and it speaks of what is the basic allowance for a monastic to have fermented cow's urine as medicine. So we have these 5 types of contentments, where Anuruddha, because he has these 8 thoughts of a great man, a Mahapurisa, and by cultivating inner tranquility, the 4 absorptions, for him his rag robes are like the most fancy kind of clothing, the food he begs is like the best of meal, being at the tree root and having a grass seat is like the most fantastic kind of dwelling place. And then in the Madhyama-āgama we are told that in wherever direction he goes, he'll be at ease, and in the Anguttara Nikaya instead he brings up this fermented cow urine as medicine, which as far as I can see fits more the sequence as it's talking about all these basic requisites of monks. This fermented cow urine is something that it takes a lot of time to prepare it, and I was one time shown it in Sri Lanka, and they have to bury it in the earth and leave it there for a very long time, and it tastes ghastly. It's not something you want to take. Anuruddha, if you become accomplished in the 8 thoughts of a great man and also attain these 4 higher states of mind, happy abidings in the present, attaining them with ease and without difficulty, then you will certainly attain one of 2 fruits. Either you will attain final knowledge here and now, or if there's a remainder of clinging, you will attain non-return. So here we are, the lead over to insight. And then the Blessed One attained a certain concentrated state, and through this concentrated state, just as a strong man might bend or stretch out his arm, the Blessed One disappeared from the sandbank forest in the Cheti country and appeared in the deer park in the Bisakala forest on Sungsumara mountain in the Bagga country. Yeah, I think I would like to continue a little further. It may become a little longer today, maybe 5 minutes longer, and we can another time stop a little shorter, but I think it would be nice for your, hopefully, still willing to discuss for my benefit and for the benefit of others on the forum if you have the whole discourse. So in Madhyama-āgama the Buddha tells the Ananda to assemble the monks, and in the Anguttara Nikaya they have already assembled. And now the Buddha teaches them the 8 thoughts. So he lists those 8 and then he gives an explanation. How is the path attained through having no desires, not through having desires? This means that when a monk has attained absence of desire, he knows himself he has attained absence of desire, but he does not let others know I am without desires. When he has attained contentment, effort, mindfulness, concentration, wisdom, absence of proliferation, he knows himself he has attained absence of proliferation, but he does not desire to let others know I have attained absence of proliferation. This is how the path is attained, through having no desires, not through having desires. So the point of few desires or no desires is not just desires for material things, but particularly this wish, this identification with this creating a sense of ego out of good qualities and really wanting others to know, like, wow, I have this, I am so content, I have such much wisdom, I have such a deep meditation practice, etc. And the second one, how is the path attained? Through contentment, not through dissatisfaction. This means that the monk practices contentment by taking robes just to cover his physical frame and taking food just to fulfill the needs of the body. Yeah, in the Anguttara Nikaya we get all 4 requisites. Here we have only robes and food, and in the Anguttara Nikaya we also have lodgings and medicine. And how is the path attained? Through seclusion, not through rejoicing in company, dwelling in company, and being together with company. This means that a monk practices seclusion by accomplishing twofold seclusion, both bodily and mental seclusion. Yeah, the Anguttara Nikaya version is a little different here. It says that when a monk has visitors, he gives them a talk that is Uyojanika Patisangyutta, Uyojaniya Patisangyutta, one of these two according to different editions. And this expression is somewhat open to interpretation. I have discussed it in my comparative study of the Madhyama Nikaya, page 692, note 43. I don't think one possible interpretation is that it means to dismiss them, but another is that it talks to inspire them. And my personal take on this is that the monk there is not talking in a way to get rid of the visitors, to dismiss them, but his whole concern is to inspire them. Anyhow, if you are interested in why I think that interpretation is preferable, giving the context, then you could look it up in my book. Then number 4, how is the path attained through effort, not through indolence? And this means that the monk constantly practices with effort to abandon evil and unwholesome states and develop wholesome states, persistently arousing his mind, single-mindedly and steadfastly, with relentless energy for the sake of developing the roots of wholesomeness. Number 5, how is the path attained through right mindfulness, not through wrong mindfulness? This means that a monk contemplates the internal body as body, contemplates internal feelings, states of mind, and phenomena as phenomena. So here we get the 4 satipatthanas. In the Anguttara Nikaya version, we instead get another definition. It's not mentioning, not mentioning the 4 satipatthanas, but just says that somebody is mindful, endowed with supreme alert mindfulness, so that recollects and remembers what has been done long ago and said long ago. And this is, I find, quite important definition of mindfulness. It shows the close relationship of mindfulness to memory. It shows that what has been done long ago is memory of autobiographical events. What has been said long ago is obviously oral transmission, recall of what has been said. And both of these have their basis in being clearly aware in the present moment. Unless I am aware now, how could I later remember it? The path is attained through a concentrated mind, not through a distracted mind. This means that the monk dwells separated from desires, separated from evil unwholesome states, up to having attained the 4th absorption. So here are the 4 jhanas. How is the path attained through wisdom, not through delusion? This means that the monk dwells developing wisdom, contemplating the rise and fall of phenomena, thus attaining knowledge, noble wisdom that is brightly penetrating, discriminative understanding for the true ending of dukkha. So, insight into impermanence leading to realization of dukkha. How is the path attained through absence of proliferation, delighting in absence of proliferation and practicing absence of proliferation, not through proliferation, not through delighting in proliferation, not through practicing proliferation. This means that the monk's mind constantly extinguishes proliferation and enjoys abiding in remainderless nirvana. His mind continuously delights in this abiding, rejoicing in mental freedom. There's a difference in formulation that in the Anguttara Nikaya doesn't mention nirvana but speaks of papancha nirodha, the cessation of proliferation. So here we have excuse me. Here we have a survey of what these 8 thoughts mean. First is that we not desiring to be known for one's good qualities. Then contentment with one's requisites, what one has. Seclusion could be bodily and mental and could express itself as a detached attitude towards visitors. Effort is clear to overcome what is unwholesome and cultivate what is wholesome. Mindfulness means to be mindful, in particular practice the 4 satipatthanas. Concentration are the 4 absorptions. Wisdom is insight into impermanence. And the eighth quality is no proliferation, means nirvana or the cessation of proliferation. And we are told that Anuruddha becomes an arahant after practicing these 8 thoughts. And there's stanzas at the end of the discourse, and with that I also come to the end of this lecture. We have 5 in the Madhyama-āgama, and the first 3 of these are also found in the Anguttara-nikāya. Knowing from afar my reflections, the supreme teacher of the world with body upright entered concentration with his mind, and immediately traversing space he came to me. He taught me regarding the 7 thoughts in my mind, and then added a further one, naming that all Buddhas delight in absence of proliferation, being far removed from any proliferation. Having come to know the Dharma from him, happily established in the true Dharma, I attain concentration and penetrative wisdom. What was to be done in the Buddhist teaching has been done. Now there's a slight difference which is not really related to our topic of tranquility and insight, but relates back to the topic of God's supernatural events. If we read it here in the Madhyama-āgama version, with body upright, he entered concentration with his mind, and immediately traversing space he came to me. We obviously get, it reads as if the Buddha is flying through the air. Now the final verse in the Anguttara-nikāya says, Manomayena kāyena idnyo prasankami. The Buddha approached Anuruddha through supernormal power with a mind-made body. Manomayena kāyena. And the same expression is also found in the Theragatha. I find this significant to assess the supernatural events in early Buddhism, and I'm building a little theory on this. And we earlier get this description how the Buddha disappears in one place and reappears in the other, and there's a standard description just as flexing one arm or bending an arm, just as quick he is there. Based on this passage, I wonder if such descriptions were originally meant to refer only to mental travel with a mind-made body. This is still a supernormal event that does not fit fully within modern Western scientific worldview, but it is something that is more easily made to agree with what we know of modern physics than the idea that the Buddha actually physically just flew up and landed somewhere else. And it is interesting that this expression is not found in the Madhyama-āgama version. And we have 2 more parallels, an individual Chinese translation which expressly say the Buddha flies. And then we have a discourse in the Ekottarika-āgama where the situation is the opposite. Anuruddha goes to see the Buddha and he walks. He doesn't fly at all. So I think this is one of those instances where I would now venture to have a hypothesis on what is early and late based on a clear finding that there is a difference here. It's a clear fact that the Anguttara-nikāya and the Theragatha speak of Manomayena kāyena, and this idea of a mind-made body is clearly not the same as the physical body. It's something mentally created. So that was what I had on the discourse on the 8 thoughts, and again, my great appreciation for this wonderful discussion last week. And I hope some of you will still be willing to continue discussing this week, even without a homework. I mean, there is this issue about the supernatural powers, and this very powerful teaching on the 8 thoughts, where any comment will be welcome. And we are only 4 minutes over time, 5 minutes. That's fine. So thank you very much, and hope to see you again next week.